Clean air is an issue that is vitally important to my constituents. I'm reminded of it every time I enter this committee room, and I look over to see the portrait of former Chairman George Brown hanging above me. Congressman Brown represented parts of Riverside County in my own district during his 34 years of service in the House, and during that time he was a champion for science and fought to improve air quality for millions across the country. He was an early supporter of the legislation creating the EPA and worked to include ozone provisions in the Clean Air Act. It's because of leaders like George Brown that we've seen air quality in Southern California make great improvements. Growing up in Riverside, I remember days where we couldn't go outside for physical education class because the smog was so bad, days where you couldn't even see the mountains. In the 1970s, the ozone levels in Southern California exceeded Federal health standard levels more than 200 times out of the year. And thanks to a lot of hard work and coordination between Federal, State, and local stakeholders, we've cut that number of days in half. Guidance from EPA has been and will continue to be a crucial component of efforts to improve air quality in Southern California, and I'm glad to learn more about the process of these standards today. My first question, Ms. Smith, can you tell me about your background, your academic training? Do you have any degrees or undergraduate degrees or advanced degrees that are scientific in nature?
I do not. I have a degree in political science and history and law. And
so your assertion today that there are parts of this country that could not meet these standards, is that an evaluation based on science or based on background training that's more political and legal in nature?
That's actually an assessment that's based on the 100 of air quality scientists and engineers that work for the Department.
But you yourself do not have academic background in science.
That's correct.
But you're here as an expert witness to offer a scientific, or is it a scientific or a political assessment?
Actually, I was asked to come and give a state's perspective on the policy implications, excuse me, and the ability for the states to actually implement and create a plan to address
Thank you very much. Mr. Olmstead, can you tell me whether or not you have any scientific advanced degrees or undergraduate training?
No, and I don't purport to do that. My role in this meeting, as well as in much of my career, is to deal with regulatory policy and how it works. And so that's my view here this morning, is to talk about how the Clean Air Act works from a regulatory perspective. And so I rely on others, and I think all of them have agreed that there are sources that cannot be controlled in the United States that contribute to a large share of the problems that we have here. So I don't think there's any scientific dispute about that. I think the question is, well, what do you do once you recognize that those are the data?
All right. Dr. Vandenberg, you believe that that the major basis on which we should establish levels of ozone that are acceptable should be based on the science concerning what ozone does to the health of the public. Is that right?
Right. There is a tremendous body of evidence, scientific evidence, on the health and environmental effects that ozone produces with exposure.
And it points to the level of 60 parts per billion. Is that right?
Again, I'm not going to speak to the specifics in terms of a level, but the scientific evidence does go from higher levels down to 60 and below. We look at the entirety of the exposures that are occurring. Some are relatively low, some are relatively high, and we look at the relationships between those exposures and effects.
Do you agree or disagree with the Chairman's assertion that parts of this country could not comply or would not be able to attain these ozone standards as proposed? Or is the scientific evidence somewhat inconclusive?
What I'd like to say is, as I understood the question, was whether the background levels of ozone would lead to non-attainment areas, if I'm correct about that. And that's where I'd have to say we'd have to look at the modeling to make those judgments. I can't say that there are any places that would not meet the standard specifically because of background levels. Background contributes to the ozone, but on top of that is the human-derived emissions.
Thank you. Mr. Dickerson? Same question.
There we go. I do not know conclusively if there are areas that would fail to meet a 60 ppb. There are certainly areas in the western United States where it might be difficult.
Okay. But Ms. Smith, you categorically believe that there would be.
Based on what we've looked at in terms of the monitoring that we've seen coming from the state of Utah, there are counties that would not meet the 60 ppb from past history.
Okay, I've heard the scientists be inconclusive, but you are absolutely certain?
Yes.
Thank you.